Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're very pleased to have you here. This morning, our presenter is Ann Titus, and she's going to be speaking on group homes, ESN homes, and medically fragile homes, and tell you a little bit about Ann. Ann joined Benchmark in 1992 as a direct support professional, and she has since held a variety of positions, including residential manager, director, and regional director. She was named vice president in April 2016 and oversees group home programs throughout Indiana and residential services in Montana. Throughout her more than 2 decades with Benchmark, she has led major deinstitutionalization projects, including moving 32 individuals with extensive medical needs from Holy Cross Living Center in South Bend into the community, and helping to move the last residents out of both Muscatatuck and Fort Wayne State Developmental Centers into extensive medical and behavioral needs homes. Most recently, Ann led a transition for people being served in a locked facility in Montana and developed and assisted them to transition into 4 community homes. She also serves as a consultant working with at-risk providers and institutions throughout the United States. Ann has been a certified MANT trainer for 16 years. So, Ann, if you are ready, and just to let everyone know, you should receive a thank you for attending email about an hour or so after this webinar has ended. That should serve as your verification that you attended the training that you can submit to your company so that you can get training credit. So, Ann, if you're ready, I will switch it over to you.
Absolutely.
And we will take questions at the end.
Okay, can everybody see my screen? Good to go?
Yes,
Amy, is my screen up for you? Okay, perfect.
Yes, it is.
So thanks. The technology is working. Thanks for having me today, guys. I'm pleased to be with you to talk to you about group home services. Throughout my slide, you'll see our Benchmark logo, but I'm not really talking about anything that's too Benchmark specific. And if I do get into something that's Benchmark specific, I'll try to remember to talk to you about that. Primarily today, if I understand correctly, from my conversations with Amy, is just to educate a little bit on the group home program in Indiana and dive a little bit deeper into the homes for folks with high medical needs and high behavioral needs. So I've started out with a few slides that will help kind of as an introduction to group homes. I apologize to those of you who have worked in group homes before or who are familiar with them, but I wanted to make sure that we started with the basics. So group homes are a little bit different than waiver in the fact that they're licensed through CMS regulations. In Indiana, those CMS regulations are monitored by the Indiana State Department of Health. Group homes are technically ICFIDs, which stands for Intermediate Care Facilities for Folks with Intellectual Disabilities. That's the same licensing requirement as the former institutions in Indiana, and pretty much are what we see throughout the country for licensure for institutions. Indiana kind of looked at their group homes a little bit differently, and we'll kind of go through the history of those. But when they started group homes, they utilized the ICF program. It was kind of a trusted and developed method to license group homes. And when we look at other states throughout the country, most of what they consider group homes are funded through the waiver program. So a little bit different in Indiana. If you look at statistics on folks that are institutionalized throughout the country, Indiana ranks 42nd, but most of those folks are served in community ICS. Homes are surveyed and licensed at least once a year. We currently have about 3 licensure surveys going on, so it's been a crazy week for us. And we're required to be in compliance with 488 standards related to programming and care. The homes and the physical structures which includes the sprinkler systems, the fire extinguisher, the fire notification system, are all monitored through the Life Safety Division. And then also they monitor our safety equipment. In addition to that, we also are part of the national focus on facilities participating in emergency preparedness, which kind of came to light through all the natural disasters when folks with disabilities and folks in nursing homes were affected by hurricanes in Texas and in Florida. And so in an effort to make sure that facilities are ready for that, we're also have a new condition of participation, which is emergency preparedness. Group homes are licensed under categories that dictate the level of staffing a person requires. And in your world, this is much like an algo. However, each client that lives in that home must meet that level of care. I'll go through the licensure levels a little bit later on, but that in essence is a little bit different than the waiver program where the person is assigned the algo and that determines their level of care or hours of care. In group homes, each home is licensed to provide a certain amount of hours of care. Group homes also are a little bit different than the waiver settings that you all are functioning in, as they're an all-inclusive day rate, which includes room and board, food, transportation, any services not covered by Medicaid, all medical program supplies, and also day service. So where in waiver, folks will have, their overall funding goes to day service and things like that. In group homes, we're actually required to contract with our day service providers, and we assume responsibility for them. So any monthly reports that they do have to be included in ours. So instead of being kind of a standalone service, it's included in the group home services. The group homes are pretty predictable spending for the state. Our rates remain very similar from year to year, and so the state doesn't see a lot of fluctuation in spending for the group home program. The homes each are staffed to meet the staffing requirements of the license. However, we are required to provide staff that meet the individual's needs. So say in essence, we have somebody in a basic developmental group home, which for all practical purposes is just your pretty typical group home. But one individual within that home is requiring one-on-one staff for either behavioral or medical needs. We are required to do that within the confines of that funding structure unless we request from the state an increase or a review of their level of care. So this translates to no increased rates when an individual requires more support. So there's no mechanism for group homes to say, hey, we need more funding for this person, they're requiring more than they need. If we truly feel that, we have to go through the process of getting their staffing level approval redetermined, and then would actually have to move them to a different house. So in waiver, there's a little more flexibility to get some additional funding if you need something for someone short term, where in the group homes that funding will remain level regardless of the person's needs, unless they would move to another house. Group homes must also have 24-hour access to the administrator, and all of this is part of our licensure requirements. They must have 24-hour access to the nurse, the behavior consultant as required, and the qualified intellectual disability professional, usually known as the QIDP or the Q, and that is a person qualified under CMS regulations to provide the case management and oversight of all programs and services. In the group home world, a Q has to have a bachelor's degree in the human services related field and at least 1 year experience working directly with people with intellectual disabilities. But they actually provide what we would probably consider case management. BDDS also oversees us in a quasi case management role. So we are responsible to do all the Medicaid redeterminations, all the individual support plans, the risk plans, and everything that in waiver is sometimes done from different providers. and then the case manager kind of puts it all together. Group homes also have to have contracts with physicians, psychiatrists, HSPPs, pharmacists, and dietitians to assist in providing clinical oversight. So our contracted psychiatrist would have to see anybody and everybody that comes into our program if they don't go to a different psychiatrist, or if the psychiatrist says, I can no longer see this individual, our contracted folks would have to take that over until the individual or their family chose a different psychiatrist. Homes are typically provider owned, so this is where it gets much different than waiver. But our CMS regulations also define how the homes must be maintained. So if Indiana State Department of Health comes in and we have bleach on our carpet or stains on our carpet that can't be removed, they'll require that we replace that. If we have furniture that's not in good repair, the provider is responsible for that. So our homes generally look a little bit different than some waiver homes, just because the provider's required to maintain that home. So we, in essence, are the landlord, the maintenance folks, the interior decorator, all that kind of fun stuff for each of the homes. A little history. Group homes began opening in Indiana in the early 1980s, and this was really the first community option for folks, with the exception of adult foster care. At that time, and I know there's a different word for it now, but adult foster care was one of the only options for folks, and also the semi-independent living program, where folks just got some drop-in services. So group homes were the first all-inclusive 24-hour setting, and we saw a lot of folks move from developmental centers at that time. Most people who were served in the beginning came out of large institutions, out of nursing homes, out of family homes a little bit, and they were typically more capable than the people in group home services today. So group homes were serving folks in the 1980s and early 90s that would very well and very easily be served in the waiver program today. However, that wasn't really an option. Throughout the time, so from the early 80s until 2003, there were really no specialty homes. They were just all your basic group homes. The only one that was kind of the exception was a licensure level where we could serve children who required behavior support. These children's homes were also the first license level to be licensed for no more than 4 beds. And so we started to see that shift kind of in the late 90s to the smaller group home settings, and actual license requirements or licensure requirements that dictated no more than 4 folks. And so some providers, including Benchmark, still have some of the older homes that serve 8 folks. But as newer homes have opened since 2000, we've really seen more 4 and 6 bed homes for folks in the community. Waiver services began almost a decade later, and they were actually grants through the state. And Benchmark was one of those companies that received some grants to start the waiver program. During this time, the waiver program was developed to waive the ICF ID and CMS regulations. And during their inceptions, they were nearly unregulated, which was kind of the goal, that folks could move out in the community and kind of do what they want. We all know that that's a little bit different today. Did you guys still have my screen?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes, we still have,
you still have my screen? I do not have my screen.
Oh, no.
Let's see what's happening. Oh, okay, what's happening? My apologies, guys.
You're fine.
Very helpful.
If you need me to, Anne, I'm pulling it up, and I can always just be your. You can tell me when you want to move on to whatever screen,
Sure.
and so give me a second here,
Let's see what
and
I've got here. Looks like it took me back to my start screen, so for some odd reason the whole thing just went down. So we'll see what we get here. I'm sorry.
I can switch it over to me. That's not a problem, and you can just tell me when you want me to show, whichever.
Okay. See if I can get it to download on my phone here.
All right, so I have it up, and it's showing my screen now. So you just tell me when you're ready for the next slide.
Okay. Unfortunately, my PowerPoint is on my computer.
Oh, no.
Oh, here we go. I got it up on my phone. So we'll wait to see what happens with my computer here. My apologies. Okay, so we're still on the history. So in 1997, Indiana still had 5 state-run institutions serving more than 900 people. I kind of go over this only because this is really when the waiver program began to grow. We still saw big rates of folks being institutionalized in the state of Indiana. Newcastle State Developmental Center closed in 1998, serving 158 people. And if you look at the waiver numbers or folks served in waiver and group homes, you'll see these numbers really go up. NISH, which was a children's institution, also closed 2006, and this is on the next slide, Amy. Silvercrest Children's State Hospital closed and transitioned 70 children. And then we also have Muscatatuck closed and Fort Wayne State Developmental Center closed in 2007. And that's when DOJ, so the Department of Justice, was pretty heavy into Indiana as far as monitoring our care and oversight of people with intellectual disabilities. When Muscatatuck closed, I believe in 2004, that is when the state kind of said, hey, we've got these institutions that are closing, and we really have no services available in the community for folks who require care of their medical needs. And so the state developed at that time the licensure level for homes for adults with extensive medical needs. Those, and we'll go more into detail with those later, but that closure was very important for the development of that program. Because again, when institutions close, and this is very consistent around the country, when institutions close, the folks that are left in those institutions or that providers kind of hesitate to take are the folks with high medical needs and the folks with high behavioral needs. And so Muscatatuck had a very large population of folks with medical needs. And actually, as other facilities had closed around the state, folks with medical needs were transferred into the Muscatatuck facility. And so that was a very important closure because it led the state of Indiana to develop the homes for adults with high medical needs. And we'll get a little more into detail with that. The Fort Wayne closure, because that was the last institution to close in the state of Indiana, they ended up with a huge population of folks with high behavioral needs. So again, as these other facilities closed around the state, folks with high behavioral needs and a lot of folks with high medical needs ended up at Fort Wayne State Developmental Center if providers couldn't support them well in the community. And so in about 2005, beginning of 2006, we started meeting as a group with the state to develop the licensure level for the exceptional support needs homes, which are what we all call ESN homes. Those were finally approved by CMS. However, when we opened those homes, they still were not approved by CMS at that time. And we ran on state straight dollars until CMS kind of accepted that. The big holdup with that was the restrictiveness of the home. was not necessarily completely in line with the CMS regulations. And so trying to figure out how providers could make it work really took a lot of time. So we opened the first ESN homes in the state. There were 5 providers selected, and it was a true provider selection process. We had to go through proposals and reproposals and things like that. So during that time, there were 5 providers that were chosen. 3 of us remain. It is Dungarvan, Benchmark, and ResCare that are responsible for the ESN program in the state of Indiana. So that was a huge step forward in making sure that that last facility in Indiana could close to have more services for folks with high behavioral and high medical needs. On the next slide, during the closures, again, group home capacity was maximized. ESN and medical homes were developed. And this is also when you can see the waiver program become much more regulated, which again, was not, I think, the original intention of waiver. Typically, back in that time, group homes would serve individuals who required greater care needs than waiver. However, there's been a shift in that over recent years. We saw that with the Muscatatuck closure, with the Fort Wayne closure. And as we've moved forward, that folks are being supported in waiver who would not have been supported in waiver, 10, 15 years ago. On the next slide, I just kind of wanted to go through licensure level for group homes. This is a little confusing, so I'll try to explain it. The hours listed behind each home's licensure level are hours per person per day. So again, hours per person per day, but that includes folks like me, that includes payroll department, it includes overhead and administrative support. So it's a little bit different in the waiver that when somebody gets, an algo, how many hours per day they can get. In group homes, it gets a little skewed because, again, the provider owns the home, manages the home, things like that, that a lot of administrative overhead is accounted for within the hours of care. Sheltered living homes, and there really are only a couple of these left in the state of Indiana. Those are 4.5 hours a day. And if you look at your current waiver population, there really was a huge realization in the state of Indiana that if folks could be successful in that level of group home, they probably should be in the community in a waiver setting. So there are very few of those homes left around today. Intensive training homes, folks get 6 hours per person per day of care, but again, that includes all those other things we talked about. Again, there are very few of these homes left in Indiana. We actually still have 3 of them. They were homes that we assumed during the Your Friends and Neighbors closure, and we are working to relicense those currently. Again, with the understanding that most folks who only require that level of care really don't need to be in the group home setting and really could be very successful in waiver. The next licensure level is developmental training homes, and those are 8 hours per person per day. Basic developmental homes, and this includes children and adults. Children, I think, and I'd have to look it up, but I assume there's probably less than 10 children's homes left in the state of Indiana. There's been a pretty big shift with FSSA recently, probably in the last 6 or 7 years, and we very rarely get referrals from children's homes unless it's kiddos who are at like a Daymar type of facility. Basic developmental homes are the majority of the homes, group homes that are in the state of Indiana. It's the largest licensure level, and folks get 10 hours per person per day. And so I think we have about 18 of these homes, and they are by far what you see in the community as far as group home goes. Again, in 2003, we started the Homes for Adults with Extensive Medical Needs. That, again, was a huge undertaking to work with the state to develop that license, but also providers had to be approved to do that. There were 3 providers at the time that were approved to provide that service. And to date, I think the state has authorized a couple other providers to open that level of home. And last but not least is the exceptional support needs homes, what we all know as ESNs. These are actually the only homes that have a minimum direct care staffing requirement, and that is part of our 460 rules. We have to have 3 staff on first, 3 staff on second, and 2 staff on overnights. However, saying that, as we talked about earlier, if folks require more supervision or more support than what the licensure allows, we have to provide that through our licensing requirements. So there have been times in ESN homes where we have had to increase staff due to the severity of behavior that we're seeing. I do want to go back to the medical needs homes. My apologies. They are a little bit different than other group homes because they require at least 10 hours of nurse oversight a week. And the flip side of that is in the ESN homes where we are required to provide 10 hours of BCBA time per week. We can utilize BCs, but they have to be under the direction of a BCBA. And we also have to have oversight from the HSTP. Some basic group home program descriptions. So these are, again, just your run-of-the-mill, the average group homes that have been around since the 80s. They typically serve 4 to 8 individuals. They are staffed 24 hours a day. And we're required to maintain active treatment through all programming. So active treatment is just not necessarily keeping folks busy, but it's keeping them engaged and learning at all times. So that active treatment component is a condition of participation within the CMS regulations. And so our programming has to be very tight, a little bit different than waiver, that if we have folks refusing to do goals for more than a couple weeks, we have to sit down and figure out what's going on and kind of redo things. If day service is not meeting their needs, we have to sit down very quickly and come up with a plan B. And this is because of the active treatment requirement that we must, people don't qualify for group homes unless they require continuous and aggressive active treatment, which means that folks have to have a pretty strong program plan. That program plan has to be implemented at all times. So, for instance, if somebody has a goal in their support plan to learn more about preparing their own food, we have to do that not only when it's scheduled, but at informal times as well. And so there's a lot of programming that happens. All of that programming has to be overseen by the QIDP, which serves as our case manager. To dive a little more into the medical homes, homes are designed to serve people requiring accessible housing. And I know throughout the state of Indiana, accessible and affordable housing is hard to find for your folks living in the waiver program or being supported by waiver. And so when these homes were designed, they have to be completely accessible, including roll-in showers, therapy tubs, zero-grade entry, wide interior and exit doors. Something that's a little bit different with our medical homes is that they just don't meet the definition of handicap accessibility. They're truly accessible. If you've got somebody in a bathroom that requires, a 2-person lift or 2-person support, you all know that, handicap accessible bathrooms in an apartment really prohibit safe lifting because they're not designed for people who not only have limited mobility, but also require 2 staff with them. And so the bathrooms, the kitchens, everything in that home is very open, and it allows not only for room for that individual, but for the staff who are going to have to be in there to support them. Individuals being approved and referred for this service generally require staff assistance for all care and medical needs. And that's actually how folks get approval, is based on how much staff support they need. So most of the folks that we serve require a wheelchair for mobility or use some sort of adaptive equipment and require direct staff supervision. So either a staff person to propel that wheelchair or a staff person to do a standby assist with somebody who can use a walker. most of our folks are on some sort of modified diet because of diagnosis of dysphagia or at risk for aspiration. So a lot of our folks require adaptive equipment during eating. A lot of our folks are on mechanically soft or pureed diets. And then we have a large population of folks who require G-tube for their feeding. We also have a lot of folks who have incontinence needs, and so we have to do skincare monitoring, wound care monitoring. Most of our folks are in some sort of modified bed, either with side rails or with pads or a hospital bed or something that can be elevated. Most of our folks require positioning. I only have a handful of folks in our 17 medical homes that don't require range of motion or who don't have some sort of therapy goals every day. And then also, making sure that that home has staff who are specially trained. Again, they have the nurse oversight, but even with 10 hours a week in the home, we're very dependent on our staff to make sure we know what's going on with our guys. A lot of the folks that we serve also have respiratory issues. We've got a lot of folks who are on oxygen, and they don't have to be. I think, out of our 17 homes, I maybe have 4 or 5 homes where we've got 1 or 2 people on oxygen. But their treatments and their medication management really require a lot of hands-on from the nurse. Also keep in mind at this point in the waiver program, there was limited regulations regarding nursing, which obviously we have now. But at that time, it was very limited as to a nurse responsibility within the house, as healthcare coordination really wasn't defined very well. Typical referrals on that come from waiver settings where providers struggle to provide the level of assistance required, or when budgets don't adequately support the individual's needs. We also have some folks who come from nursing homes. I'll tell you that does not happen at the rates in which it should. We all know Indiana has a large number of folks with intellectual disabilities currently residing in nursing homes. And we don't see the influx from nursing homes like we should. I'm actually currently transitioning one individual from a nursing home, and his mom said, "I never even knew this was an option." And so there's somewhat of a disconnect between aging and beads to make sure that folks know that a community option is available. There's been several settlement agreements in Indiana to make sure folks in nursing homes understand that they have an option for community living, but that typically doesn't get a lot of attention during care plan meetings within the nursing homes. We have a higher level of staff available, so we're 2 to 4 during waking hours, and either 2 to 4 or 1 to 4 during overnight. All the bedrooms have exits, so in case of emergency, we literally can open the door, take the brakes off their beds, and out we go. And so the physical environment really helps us provide that level of service that these guys need. Positive outcomes that have happened. We typically see a decrease in hospitalizations and urgent center visits when folks come from their family home or from the waiver program, only because the nurses are involved at a much higher rate, and so we can catch things quicker before they become emergent. The higher level of staff available, the accessible housing and vehicles. All the houses have, at least all of ours, have handicap accessible vehicles. And we also have routine monitoring of all our equipment. And so, a lot of times folks will go into the emergency room because their O2 concentrator isn't working, and we're required to have them monitored so often. So our equipment is usually in good working order, and the provider being responsible for that equipment kind of changes the game a little bit. So if we have a Hoyer lift that on a Tuesday doesn't function, I'm going to have a Hoyer lift in there by the end of the day. And so it just allows for us to be a little more nimble and a little quicker. Level of risk of falls is fewer. due to the fewer transfers of the individual and the physical structure of the home and also the equipment and the space available. So in the waiver program, because accessibility of bathrooms is really an issue, and accessible housing, staff may be unable to take wheelchairs through doors, and so they may be, transferring people on a much higher rate because the physical structure doesn't really support. On the next slide, I just tossed in some pictures because I'm kind of a picture girl. Makes me happy. And so you'll see some of our consumers and also one of the houses. All of our houses are in residential neighborhoods, and you'd never know it was a group home. And so they kind of blend in like any waiver home would, blend into that community as much as possible. Next slide talks about the ESN program description. So upon inception, homes served individuals that were coming from institutions. So throughout the state of Indiana, when these homes all opened, and like I said, ResCare, Dungarvan, and Benchmark are the providers who have the service currently. We all of the homes were developed for the closures of the Fort Wayne State Developmental Center. And so with the exception of a few openings that we had during that time, all those folks came from state-run institutions. Over time, the individuals being referred are coming from locked facilities. So we see folks coming from Richmond, Logan Sport. We see folks coming from the CRM&S, which are the large ICFIDs that ResCare operates. I believe there's one in Southern Indiana and one in Marion, and they're more of a secure facility. But we see folks transitioning from those facilities. Most of the individuals that we serve honestly come from failed placements. So either folks that are in regular group homes who are not being supported well, or folks that are in the waiver program who really are having a hard time. So folks who are experiencing trouble with the law, folks who are experiencing high rates of dangerous behavior that the team can't, get a handle on or get figured out. The goal with ESNs is to discharge as soon as possible. And interestingly enough, we have to have their first discharge plan done within 30 days of admission. And so each consumer has goals either for reduced rates in behavior, reduced intensity of behavior, or reduced staff support. So if somebody's one-on-one in the community and a year later they're going out in the community with another individual and one staff, so they're 1-on-2, we consider that a success and moving towards going to a less restrictive environment. We've been fairly successful. All the providers have been fairly successful in this, and we have a number of post-discharge success stories, but we've also identified a lot of challenges in re-entering the waiver program or a general group home. All of the providers worked together about 3 years ago to identify some issues for the state. And so as folks are being discharged from ESN homes into the waiver setting, we're seeing an increased number of psychiatric hospitalizations, an increased number of police involvement, and an increased number of reintroduction of medications or higher doses or multiple medications. And so we, again, are kind of talking to the state about that to see how we reintroduce people into the waiver program and how to make sure before they leave the group home program that the waiver provider is trained as best as possible, that those plans are as tight as possible, and that they have a high enough algo to support them, in addition to making sure that their behavior consultant is in place and their case manager is very savvy in knowing how those plans need to come together. On the next slide, it talks about the support needs homes. They're 4-person homes, and again, they require continuous and aggressive support due to unsafe behavior. Homes are staffed by DSPs in a 3, 3, and 2. So again, we're 3 staff on first, 3 staff on second, and 2 staff overnight. However, every home is also supported by a manager and a QIDP. And so when we go one-on-one, it's typically, a manager or the queue getting in there. And so in the group homes, you have a lot more administrative support than what you have in waiver. And so a lot of times we can get additional supports on site to make sure that our folks don't continue unsafe behavior, or that we can give our staff a break if they're, part of the problem or the target of that behavior. Also, to make sure that we're not utilizing our police departments. I think we've probably had, and this is benchmark specific, a couple calls to the police that our staff have made, and that is definitely a training issue. It's definitely a red flag for us if our staff are utilizing police to assist with behavior. So a little bit different than the waiver in the fact that all those resources can kind of surround that client and make sure that we've got what we need for them. We also have a nurse. Our nurse supports each home around 5 hours a week. And the importance of the nurse there is to monitor psychiatric meds, and they work very closely with the BCBAs. So every time we have a med change, we are pinging that med change on our monthlies to make sure we can monitor for increase in behavior, increase in side effects, things like that. So that way we don't keep folks on medications, one, that aren't working, or two, that are causing them side effects or other problems. All the homes in Indiana were built following a floor plan to meet the needs of the clients and provide for safety of staff. So not only did the providers have to be approved, their floor plans had to be approved, and all the finishes within that home had to be approved. Like, just one silly example is we have locking toilet tank lids. So I'm sure you guys are much like us. You go into your waiver homes and somehow the toilet lid's gone. So ours lock, so they can't be used as a weapon. All of our shower curtain rods are actually bolted into the walls. And so we had to do things in a certain way to make sure that folks were safe. Referrals are maintained, and this is very different than any other group home. Referrals are maintained and prioritized at the central office. Local BDDS staff coordinators can make recommendations. However, all placement decisions occur through central office, as this is a needs-based program, and there's very little focus on area of the home. So there are times when I have folks in a home in Fort Wayne that are from Southern Indiana, and I have somebody from Fort Wayne in a home in Southern Indiana. So there's very little, unless the guardian adamantly pushes for it, there's very little regard to kind of the home county or where folks are from. And so because it is seen as a short-term placement and as kind of a stabilization program, it really is whoever's top on the state's priority list, the next provider that has a space available will get that referral. Group home providers in the ESN can ask for additional referrals. So in essence, if we have a space for an individual available, but I already have 2 one-on-one folks in that house, and the person that the state referring is going to require one-on-one, I can't necessarily provide that level of service in the home. So it's kind of like putting together a puzzle in all group homes that you have to make sure you have enough staff resources. The other issue, if we have somebody who is, a sex offender, and we've got folks in the house who could be victimized, we have to make sure that we piece that population together a little bit differently. We are required, however, if we have an opening that one of our folks, our current clients, can move into. So we create an opening at a home that would be able to serve the person being referred. And so it's not as individual friendly as far as placement goes. The guys don't really get to come in and interview their roommates and do that kind of thing. If you need that level of service, you're referred for it. If there's a bed that meets your needs, that's yours. And so it's a little less consumer choice driven than what we see in Waiver or in our other group homes. Again, I've got some pictures there on the next slide of some of our guys. They look much happier in some of those pictures than they look on some other days. But we really do have a great group of folks. With Benchmark, I have 4 homes in Fort Wayne area, 2 homes in the Marion area, and 3 homes down in southern Indiana. Of those homes, I only have 3 that serve women. Most of our population is male. As far as positive outcomes that we've seen, there's been a ton. There's been a ton of struggles, and these guys make us work really hard, and they've kind of forced us to make our program better. But some of the positive outcomes is increased community involvement. All ESN participants are either in vocational or recreational day service. Now, that being said, we staff them there. And so we go with them places until the team determines that maybe they can, handle less supervision. So really, as far as vocational and recreational services, our employees, our group home employees go with them to support them. And that's probably the biggest struggle we see when folks move into the waiver program, is that they do not have staff support at a day service. And even though they want to go to work, they want to go and have that social aspect of day service, their behavior and the level of supervision does not support that. And so what we've seen is folks being kind of kicked out of day service, and then they're isolated. And even if the waiver provider takes them to the Y 5 times a week and does all those kind of things, they're still missing that social piece with their peers. And so that's been one struggle with folks that we're trying to address. How do we handle that, moving folks into the waiver program? Several individuals are receiving less medication than when they came into the program. Again, on the flip side of that, when we look at our folks who have transitioned out, the ones we have statistics and data on, we see the reintroduction of a lot of medications because the team is a little, I don't want to say disjointed, but in the group homes, everybody works for the same provider. And so getting folks together on a Friday night at 9 o'clock is no problem. We're all on call. And so if we have an emergency with a client, we all get together as a team and figure that out real quick. And so when we have behavioral issues come up, we try to look at it medically, programmatically, environmentally, and then psychiatrically. And we all know sometimes when our teams maybe don't function really well, that we jump to medications for folks. And so we start to see, as folks transition out, the reintroduction of medications. All individuals participate in activities regularly, and we know that's the issue in a lot of programs, some with greater than one-on-one staffing. I have a big pocket of people that we have to staff 2-on-1 out in the community who are in the ESN program, and so managers, Qs, directors, DCs, nurses, everybody jumps in to help do that. And again, that's where the group home program is really beneficial for these folks because we have those resources to do that. Behavior plans are updated regularly. I have several folks, we probably, I can't think of a single month within the last year that we haven't redone somebody's behavior plan, not because it was due, not because the annual was due, but because that person was struggling, or because the staff saw something new, or because they're doing so well, we need to lessen restrictions. And so we look at behavior plans every month and look at the behavior data with that to see if we need to make changes. And so that's another cool thing about the ESN program, is that we're constantly changing, either to minimize restrictions or to get them in there real quick in case we're seeing something new and dangerous. People are working at increasing their ability to communicate at many different levels. MANT teaches us, and any program teaches us, that all behavior is communication. And so, we work really hard with our administrative team and the BCBA to make sure that folks have a method of communication. And even if their communication is negative, physical aggression or property destruction, that we're identifying that quickly and trying to figure out what they either are trying to get to or get away from. They're also participating in groups within Benchmark and community organizations. And so we're trying to make sure that they have support outside of our home. A lot of times I think when our guys leave, they feel like this team that was super involved with them just goes away because of the level of support they require. It's kind of an all hands on deck kind of model. And so the guys, you know, if they have outlets outside of us, that's super important. How it works, again, Benchmark chooses MANT as their crisis intervention program. The other providers may use something different. I know ResCare has their own, and I'm not sure what Dungarvin's using. But we try to make sure we have an environment of respect. And there are days when I'm super proud of my staff, and there are days when I know we need to work on some things for making sure, you know, our goal is to make sure that people not only feel respect, that they learn self-respect before they take off out of our program. And so I never want people to feel like it feels restrictive to them. There may be restrictions, but I never want it to feel restrictive to them. We debrief at all levels. And again, this is one thing in the group homes, we debrief within 24 hours of any incident that required a physical restraint, that was physically aggressive, or somebody was injured, or there was an elopement. And so we've got 24 hours now. That's not to say that within, you know, as soon as that behavior is over and we get the call from the staff, if they need help or if they've handled it, we're all talking and saying, do we need one-on-one staff? What staff do we have on shift? Can we switch the staff with somebody else? So there's a lot of nimbleness within the ESN program to make sure that we're doing what's right for the guys. But within 24 hours, we sit down with a formal debriefing, and that includes the DSPs, the behavior consultant, all the management team, and the administrator, to make sure that we're doing what's right, and that whatever incident occurred, we put in whatever safeguards to make sure it doesn't recur. And again, being nimble and making changes quickly and being responsible at all levels, you know, making sure that we're looking at everything from every single level for that individual. So the ESN programs are very challenging. The medical programs are very challenging. The debriefing process happens in the medical homes as well. So anytime we have somebody come out post-hospitalization, we have a team meeting to make sure that we've got all their meds and treatments in place, that there wasn't anything that the hospital missed. And so the specialty homes really do allow us to do what we would like to do for every group home, for every waiver setting. It really does afford us the opportunity to make sure that we're doing the right thing. So that is my overview. I'm sorry if it was too much, not enough, but
no,
I can definitely take
wonderful.
any questions. Good, okay. Okay.
It was excellent.
Are there any questions that are popping up that I can help address? Okay.
Absolutely. Yes. Great information. We actually had somebody say that is fabulous information. And somebody else had noted that you were doing just an excellent job reviewing. So there is a question. Is the state considering more ESN homes? This particular case manager has an individual who needs the service, and the guardian was told that there's up to a 3-year waiting list. And so, you know, that's discouraging to the team when you have people struggling. So any insight?
Yeah, that may be the largest, most overriding question that we all have on ESN. There's pros and cons to both. I have always had this theory, if you build it, they will come. Same thing with the institutions. You know, when the institutions were still open, people came in at the same rate they went out. And now that we don't have that option, people aren't going in. The issue right now in most states throughout the country, and I won't pick on Indiana because it's happening in most states, is there is no mechanism for provider support for even short-term or even some long-term behavior issues. Back in 2007, when the developmental center closed, Indiana developed the crisis program, where there were mobile teams that could go out and assist providers, assist families, assist individuals, assist police departments, and assist hospitals when they were dealing with folks with intellectual disabilities who were having behavior problems. And so it's kind of a multifold issue across the country, is that there may be folks who could be or should be supported outside of an ESN home better than they are today. And so I know that's kind of a non-answer, but when I look at the state of Indiana, and like I said, almost every other state throughout the country, is that we want to close institutions and put people into the least restrictive environment. However, then those supports aren't there to make sure that that provider can be successful, and that that consumer can be successful. So that's the big overriding issue. I do not think at this point that the state is entertaining any more ESNs, but that would probably be a question for the state. Originally, when we opened these homes, they wanted to keep it for the folks who required it the most, I guess. And that's really hard for that mom or that provider that's struggling. So the system should flow in which people who have learned the skills they need to learn should be moving out into the waiver program at higher rates than they are. However, the issue with that is that all of the ESN providers and most of the waiver providers are very aware of the fact that the waiver program is not supporting folks at the same level, even when they do transition out of an ESN. Like I said, we're seeing a lot of rehospitalizations, increased meds, because there's really just a lack of knowledge and resource in dealing with folks with behavioral needs. So the goal is to make sure that when folks come in, we have a discharge plan and we move them out as quickly as possible. So it's almost like a constant flow of people through. However, we've identified a lot of problems in that. One, people are being admitted to ESN homes because not necessarily that the client can't be served in the waiver setting, but they aren't being supported appropriately in the waiver setting. And then, so there have been times where we have taken folks in and 6 months later, we're like, they need to leave. They don't require this level of care. And so there really is not a good assessment in the state of Indiana that determines whether it's the person that requires the ESN or that provider or that family need more support or more training. And so it's kind of, that's a multifaceted question. So my answer to the actual, are we constructing new homes currently? No. Has there been a proposal to do more homes? No. However, there are some global overriding issues that are not allowing that wheel to move as smoothly as it should. And those have been brought to the state's attention, and we're all very aware of what it is. I just don't think there's a magic wand that fixes it right now. As far as the waiting list, that's done on priority. So I will tell you that if they're telling a mother, you know, the waiting list can be 3 years deep, even when she gets to that top of that list, again, the provider has to kind of put that house together like a puzzle. And so that person may not fit into that current opening. The provider may also have an emergency referral, somebody who's being released from jail who has nowhere to go. And so even though there's a waiting list, it's not like waiver where there's a number assigned to you. I'm 17 on the list. That does not exist in group homes. So that's the bleak part of the ESN program at this point.
So what is the criteria? Oh, I'm sorry.
I just said we are talking about it with the state, with the other providers, because we understand there's a greater need than what we're serving. There are only, we have 9 homes. Dungarvan has 3 and ResCare has 3, and we have 9. So there are 15 homes in the state, all serving 4 folks. And so you have to imagine that compared to our general population is a very small percentage. You also have the CRM&S now, which are ResCare's more secure facilities. Those were actually not open when we opened the ESN program. So there's more resources than there were, but I'm not sure that the CRM&S offers that same level of community involvement that the ESN program does.
Okay. what is the criteria that would make somebody a priority? Or does it kind of vary?
It varies. I have to be honest with you, it varies. And we've been talking to the state about that we need to have clear criteria. Somebody who will jump the line will be somebody who is inpatient at a psych unit and has no provider to go to. A lot of times families will take their individuals to a psych facility and then refuse to go pick them up because they can't serve them. And I'm not saying anything disrespectful about that family. They're all doing what they have to do. But it really is, it's dependent on any day. My guess is somebody else goes to that top of the list than another person. And there may be people on that list still with the state that truly don't require that level of care. They simply maybe were going through, some cycling, some psychiatric changes, some behavioral changes.
Okay. Well, it is 11 a.m. and I don't want to keep anyone longer than necessary. Are there any other quick questions before we let Ann go and end our webinar today? I'll give everyone just a couple seconds. I think you covered everything really well, so it's a good sign that we don't have a lot of questions.
Sorry, it's a big fish to swallow. I did include my email on there. That's probably the easiest way to reach me. Okay. If y'all do have any questions and want to shoot me an email, or if there's questions even that don't relate to benchmark, I'm sure I could reach out to the other ESN directors and talk more about it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, no other questions have come in. I can't tell you how much we appreciate this and just how informative this session was for us. We're getting lots of positive feedback from people. So I thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you all very much. Sorry for my technical difficulties, and thank you for being patient with me.
We can always make it work. So have a wonderful day. And
thanks so much.
And that's the end. Thank you. And that's the end of the webinar, everyone. So thank you so much for joining us today. Goodbye.